The guard said it was a storage site, but the wiring diagrams told a different story beneath the flag. Beneath the chalked names was the camp built to unmake identity. It was not meant to be a witness, I was meant to be Data Camp King. They called it a transit station, but no one transited without leaving something behind: fingerprints, language, an accent, sometimes a year. Sometimes an Amithia flew them in through Frankfurt, men who could survive gulags, but not question scientists with bleeding minds. SS doctors with clean fingernails, Soviet defectors with trembling syntax. We made them diagrams, asked them to draw the machines they'd seen, logged the interviews on punched tape, but sometimes I stayed long after the lights dimmed in Block 6. There was a room, not on the official layout, no door. Just a pressure-sealed panel behind the boiler stack, and a Realtoril marked Monaco 7B. They played it once, for training a voice, speaking flawless Russian, and then sudden English male. But modulated, like the tone had been filtered, memory retention beyond protocol thresholds. Subject persists post-dissolution. I asked what it meant. They handed me a form, Form 67R. Acknowledgement of operational exposure. Never mentioned the man by name, only 0461. Subject retained from post-Korean War retrieval, but in the file margin, handwritten, Karpov. He arrived blindfolded, wrists in gauze, not from injury, from implant removal. They said he could recite entire scripts from memory, but didn't know what year it was. Called himself a technician, but couldn't operate a single valve. Kept asking about a room that didn't exist, room E12, where they played the lights. They let me observe once. I was told to pretend to catalog the EEGs, but there was no EEG, just a projector, a rotating spiral, and a low frequency. Whom he asked the doctor what the protocol was. He said, "We're reformatting him. If he resists, we revert." I didn't understand what revert meant until they played him a song, a lullaby in German. He screamed for 9 minutes, then forgot how to speak entirely. Chart had red slashes: intervention X3, detention indefinite, and then escaped. Just a question mark, no timestamp, no follow-up. Memethy sealed that part of the log with red tape, but I'd already made a carbon copy, hid it in the false bottom of my locker. Karpov wasn't the only one there, was a woman. French resistance, codename Vesna, captured in 44. Reappeared in 52, fluent in 4 dialects, but now couldn't remember her birth name. She'd been passed between units, like a carrier pigeon. SS gives NKVD, gives CIA, until the only language she responded to was silence. He tried a new protocol on her MIRE retention one-way glass. Endless playback of herself until she began speaking in third person. Wrote it down as success, I wrote it down as vacancy. King was built on memory's edge. It didn't need fences. It had forgetting the longer you stayed, the fewer nouns you kept. I once saw a translator forget what a window was called. He pointed and said, "Exit without door." The files were never labeled truthfully, one folder marked personnel reassignment held photos of men post-lobotomy, smiling faintly, like something had been lifted. I found one marked MKU4. 12 cross-referenced, with sub-project art. Not artichoke, just art inside. Transcripts from 1951 of men administered scopolamine, then made to recite familial trauma, over and over, until the names blurred into number sand. Beneath that, a hand-sketched design, something like a chair butt, with ocular restraints, light emitters at forehead level, and beneath, in blocky pencil, used before sleep state, retention, optimal. The ink was smudged, but I copied it. I kept copying everything until the day someone opened my drawer. They didn't fire me, they promoted me and reassigned me to archival deep containment, which meant burn box operator, which meant destroying what I used to preserve as some nights. I recognized the folders, ones I'd sorted with gloves, pages I'd flattened with a ruler, now turned to ash in a metal throthy. Gave us gloves not to protect the files, but to prevent identity transference. That's what they called it when you started to dream in someone else's memory. Never said where the patients went, only that they no longer presented extractive utility. Some were transferred to US soil, others vanished mid-paper trance. I saw a requisition form for MK Delvis, a European subproject signature, blacked out, but the footer read, via Camp King gives Langley gives Belgij. Duarato Stigablasi, traced BLDG 213. On the facility schematic, there was no 213. I asked. They said, it's off-grid. That means it doesn't concern you. But I'd already seen too much already memorized subject codes. 0461, Vesna, 119B. Turing proxy, Echo Blue, Omega Northend. Then one day a cassette arrived with no label, just a strip of tape, scrawled 0461 post-event. I played it in the machine, heard breath, then a whisper. I didn't escape. They let me think I did, then static boot, at 14 seconds in. Something strange, a single note, repeating every 6 seconds. When run through frequency analysis, it revealed coordinatizen, the middle of the Taunus forest, west of the camp. Perimeter. I went there at night. Nothing was left except a rusted hatch door chained shut from the inside. I reported it. They said, you misread the coordinates. But I hadn't memorized the MOND. A week later, I was told the facility had been decommissioned, replaced by a housing unit, but the records showed no permits filed. No construction teams deployed. It vanished like everything else, and yet, I still had the carbon copy, still had the cassette, still had the diagrams sketched in, shaking hands by a man who forgot how to say his own name, but remembered the shape of the light. They called it the camp for language extraction, but what they took wasn't language, it was witness. Sometimes I dream in his voice, not Karpov's voice, the one from the tape, the one that says, they let me think I escaped. His breath enters my lungs, I speak syllables that never belonged to me, and I wake up remembering places I never went. Corridors to clean paper too. Old smells of acetone and dust and melting reels who weren't supposed to save anything we were supposed to handle. They trained us to be neutral, no sympathy, no questions, but you can't stay neutral in a room built to erase. You begin to dissolve. Quietly, like them, I started forgetting people I knew, old friends, the name of my childhood street once. My own signature looked strange to Methy, said it was stress, but I had read Protocol Memo D47. Secondary exposure to persistent erasure fields may cause bleed-through memory instability. I was a burn technician, but I remembered too well in late 55. They moved the last of the files to Frankfurt, but not by truck, by hand envelopes, strapped 2 wrists of couriers, no photocopies, no carbon, one man, one truth, one chance to disappear. Watched one courier get intercepted, his body showed up in the main river, but the file didn't. Weeks later, that file's description appeared in a burn manifest with no source signature. Thoughts. When I knew the system wasn't leaking, the system was consuming itself. I looked deeper into MK Ultra's German roots. They always said it began at Fort Detrick, but that was branding. The first drafts were carved at Oberursel, and even earlier in Operation Dustbin. 1945 Dustbin wasn't for Nazis, it was for ideas, memory, engineering, mood regulation, neural overlays. They brought over the math, but left behind the names like Dr. Hubertus Strughold, later praised by NASA, or Dr. Kurt Plattner, whose chemical trials were quietly filed under Joint Allied Research. Plattner's work used to sit in Camp King's lower archive, 2 vials, and a reel labeled Confession via Hypnotoxin 3. They used it on a man they couldn't break, an East German physicist. Accused of espionage for 5 days, he denied everything. On day 6, he asked to speak to a priest. They played the tape. He spoke of crimes he hadn't committed, but he believed he had. Afterward, his heartbeat never returned to baseline. He died 13 hours later. Thinking he was guilty, I helped clean the room. The priest never evaded. In 1956, I was assigned to monitor the new imports, mostly Hungarian defectors from the uprising. One had perfect memory, but didn't recognize his own reflection. Another refused to speak unless light flickered every 4 seconds. They trained me that way. He said when I asked who He said I wasn't told. But they wore your flag. I wanted to forget, but forgetting is a privilege for those who never cataloged the pattern of a See, I met a woman once, a nurse from Warsaw. She was fluent in silence. Showed me how to fake the burn records, how to replace incinerated sheets with innocuous ones, how to misfile, not destroy, the last truths. Left called it misremembering, an unofficial operation between ghosts. Told me about a child kept in the lower wing for 3 months, never spoken to, only observed. They showed him his mother's voice through a gramophone, but never let her near after 80 days. He no longer reacted to his own name. They called it success, we called it subtraction. Her file vanished, the nurse to no exit logs, no death record, only a locker, emptied except one item, a toy windmill spinning endlessly from a nearby venti. Said it was unsanctioned, but I found a funding line buried in the CIA's fiscal ledger, line 378. Pediatric obedience, MKM. Value, $16,000. Purpose, long-term retention thresholds in pre-language stages. The child's number was 020. His recording still loops. Somewhere, a child repeating a single word again, again, again. Some nights I hear it in my dreams, some days I hear it in the Vensu. Start to realize this wasn't about espionage, not entirely. This was about shaping the edge of humanity. Seeing how far the wire could bend before it snaps. Meltra was just a summary name, a digest, a distraction. The real work had no title, just rooms and tones. An absentee came from all over. Chile, Greece, Algeria, brought in through diplomatic immunity, then filed under clinical observation. A man from Morocco, eyes clouded by lithium. He had seen light projected into blood, not metaphor, a literal device, a thought corrector. Soviet design. They drew it for us, and died 2 weeks later of voluntary cardiac arrest. We didn't believe in ghosts, but we believed in delayed mortality, that a man could be told something so profound, so hidden, that his body would collapse. From Carrianite was promoted again, but each title meant silence. B. 1958. The tape library had been moved. I was told it went to Fort Meade, but I found a memo, misrouted, addressed to Stanford subsection, Behavioral Recursion Unit, Stanford, the university. The same one whose psychology department accidentally discovered behavioral collapse in 1971. Except it wasn't accidental. I found a budget sheet. Stanford study, MK return, Echo project phase. I funded in 59, phase 2 approved. For prison simulation, under dyne-devoted conditions. They weren't testing cruelty, they were confirming calibration. C. Camp King had finished the tuning. America just broadcast the signal spiral from Monarcho 7B, the voice frequency. The memory walls, they became exportable, wrapped in theory, dripped into policy. Wanted to quit. I drafted a resignation, but it triggered an evaluation. I was taken to room for asked if I believed my memories were factual. I said, yes. They replied, then you've been compromised. I was sent home for 6 months, no phone, no mail, just a note saying medical leave. When I returned, everything was gone. Camp King had become a logistics base. The burn room was converted to storage, and no one remembered the code to the old sub-base. Asked about 0461, no record. I asked about Vesna, only a French file marked missing, presumed resettled. I asked about the windmill, they didn't know what I meant, but I remembered because I had copied everything, not out of bravery, out of obsession, out of fear that what they erased would one day need to be recalled. I stayed quiet for years, married someone who never asked about my work, raised a child who still looks at me like I'm whole, but inside there are still corridors, and the reel keeps clicking in. The Freedom of Information Act passed. I watched people celebrate as if truth had been freed, but I recognized the files they released, the safe ones, the incomplete ones. Redacted beyond coherence, names misspelled on purpose, dates swapped, reels omitted. The gave the public a version, but not the Mapith. Map still lives in men like me, in those who were told. Some files aren't redacted. They were never supposed to exist. Sometimes I hold the carbon copies still faint with typewriter ink, the one marked 0461 post-intervention cognition variants. He had drawn the spiral again and again until the paper tore, each line tighter than the last, like he was trying to trap the memory, not express I-10 sometimes. I listened to the cassette, that 14-second static, then his voice. They let me think I escaped. I asked myself, what does escape even mean if the spiral still spins in your skull, if your mind isn't your own but a BROADCAST tower for someone else's experiment? I started hearing tones not in dreams, but in public elevators, shopping malls, TV intermissions, frequency low. Almost felt rather than heard, like the hum of the projector, like the one used in room E12. The one Karpov insisted was relearned. That's when I understood he hadn't escaped the camp, he'd escaped the body. But the pattern stayed. What they'd created in Camp King wasn't just obedience. It was continuity, a self-racing archive, a memory that would infect other memories by proximity, by attention, by belief. Had passed it to me, and now I pass it to you. You might think you're safe, you might think this is history, but ask yourself, why is room E12 not in the blueprint? Why are the records of Vesna gone? Why does Mona CH07B not exist in any database? Not giving you proof, I'm giving you contamination-based truth. Once touched, lingers even in disbelief. Kept the tape but never copied it, because duplication wasn't the point. Transmission was. Camp King didn't fail. It succeeded so completely that it vanished. It sylphaned those it shaped. Walk among you, calm, normal, forgetting, at the perfect rate. I once saw my reflection distort, not in glass, but in memory, a moment I'd lived, but now watched from the outside, like I was the subject, like I was in room E12, and the spiral was behind my eye stats. When I stopped writing for 12 years, I said nothing, burned my own notes, not out of fear but out of fatigue. About recently a voice reached me, a researcher, young, careful, asking about Camp King, about a name scratched into a classified index 0461, about why some tapes hum at the wrong frequency, and why Langley's archive shows a room that isn't on the architect's plan. She didn't accuse, she observed, like I once died in. I realized she'd found the breach, the silent breath between frames where the erased still speak. I don't know if she'll survive it, not physically, but epistemically. Once you know, you carry the the data. The Shapi spiral isn't just a drawing, it's a transmission vessel, like Karpov's voice, like this monologue, like the hum you don't notice until it matches. Your auntie told us some memories were too dangerous, but they lied. It's not the memory, it's the silence that follows. Child who said again, the woman who spoke in third person, the physicist who died believing he sinned, the courier whose wrist carried truth, and the room that played the light into the eye until the mind shattered just right. None of them escape it, and neither did You can burn a real scramble, a cassette, erase a log, but you can't unhear the tone. No, the one you just started noticing after all these years. Slow, repetitive, steady, a whisper behind every silence saying again, again, again. The truth doesn't return, it waits not for permission, but for transmission. And now it's yours. This is not testimony, this is residue. There is no room E12, and yet you've been there. Oh, remember the shape of the light, even if you never saw it. Thoughts, what Camp King built, not obedience, not control. Continuity. Let us live so the pattern would persist quietly, in language, in fear, in silence. This is not a confession. This is the part of the file they never wrote down, because it was never meant to stop. And if you're hearing this, it already began again.